Red Hollow sat at the edge of nowhere, a town too small for maps and too stubborn to die. The railroad had promised to come once, back when folks still believed in promises. But it never did. Now, only the wind traveled through, carrying dust, old sins, and the echo of boots on warped boards. The sun hung low, bleeding into the horizon, painting the town in gold and rust. Men on the boardwalks leaned in their chairs, hats tipped low, eyes half asleep, but never blind. Every stranger that passed was measured, not by words, but by the weight of his silence. The blacksmith's hammer had gone quiet, and even the dogs kept to the shade. Only the saloon at the far end of Main Street still made noise, a lazy piano tune, a few laughs that tried too hard to sound brave, and the squeak of a swinging door that had seen more trouble than mercy. That's when he came riding in, a tall man on a worn-out horse, both coated in dust the color of sun-baked clay. He rode slow, not like a man in a hurry or one looking to hide, but like someone who had been riding a long time and wasn't sure if stopping made any difference. The horse's hooves thudded soft against the dirt street, a sound that made the talkers on the porch pause mid-sentence. His coat hung heavy, frayed at the cuffs. A wide-brimmed hat cast his face in shadow, and what little could be seen showed neither youth nor age, just a stillness, like stone that had learned to breathe. His shoulders were broad enough to fill the doorway when he stepped off his horse. He tied the reins loosely to the post outside the saloon and walked in without a word. The piano stopped. Inside, the air was thick with cigar smoke and whiskey. The scent of sweat and old gun oil hung in the corners. A few men looked up, a few looked away, but all took his measure in one glance. He walked to the counter, boots thudding slow, and said only 2 words. "Black coffee." Clara Briggs, who ran the place with a rifle under the bar and no husband to speak of, raised a brow. She'd seen every type of man, drifters, dreamers, killers, but this one was different. Not for what he said, but for what he didn't. She poured him a cup. He took it in both hands, big as spades, the steam rising into the low lamplight. His hands were scarred, but not from work, from something older. Years of gunpowder, maybe. Rope burns, too. He sipped slow, as if tasting the silence itself. "New in town?" Clara asked. He nodded once. "Got a name?" He didn't answer right away. Just looked at the dark swirl in his cup. "Don't matter much," he said finally. His voice was low, steady, the kind that made men stop talking without knowing why. In the back, laughter erupted, rough and sharp. A group of 4 men were playing cards. The biggest of them, a scar-faced brute with a silver tooth, slammed down his hand and looked over. "Well, look at here," he said, grinning. "We got ourselves a mute ox." The others laughed. "Hey, ox," another called. "You lose your tongue out on the trail, or are you just too big to bother talking to folks?" The stranger didn't look their way. He set his cup down, careful as a man setting a headstone. Clara's eyes flicked from him to the men and back. "That's Rafe Dolan and his crew," she whispered. "Best keep to yourself. They run things around here when the sheriff's sober, and even more when he ain't." Rafe stood, chair leg scraping. "What's your name, ox?" No reply. Rafe grinned wider. "Ain't polite, you know. Ignorant your betters." He walked up, close enough to smell the trail dust on the stranger's coat. "Or maybe you think you're better than me?" The stranger didn't move. His eyes stayed on the cup. That only made Rafe angrier. "You deaf giant." He turned to his men. "Maybe we ought to teach him how to listen." The saloon went quiet except for the slow creak of the ceiling fan. Clara's fingers brushed the rifle under the bar, but she didn't pull it yet. The stranger didn't flinch, didn't even blink. Rafe's hand hovered over his holster, just a hint, a test. "Tell me, big man," he sneered. "You any good with that size, or you just carry it for show?" The stranger finally spoke. His tone was calm, but carried a weight that filled the room. "Don't aim to cause no trouble." Rafe chuckled. "Well, trouble's got aim enough for both of us." One of the other bandits laughed, spitting tobacco onto the floor. "Look at him, sitting there like a church statue. Maybe he prays before fighting." More laughter. The piano man quietly slipped his stool away and ducked behind the keys. Clara's voice cut through, sharp as a whip. Rafe Dolan, leave him be. He ain't done you no harm. Rafe smirked. You speak for him now, Clara? Someone's got to. You're too busy hearing your own echo. The saloon chuckled, not with Rafe this time, but at him. His smile faltered. He looked back at the stranger. You lucky the lady's talking for you, Ox. Wouldn't want to see you bleed on her clean floor. Still, the stranger didn't rise. Didn't even meet his eyes. Rafe spat at the floor and turned back to his men. Gentle Ox, he said loudly. That's what we'll call him. The Gentle Ox of Red Hollow. The men laughed again, but it rang hollow, because somewhere beneath that laughter was unease, the kind that crawls up a man's neck when he knows he's looking at something dangerous and can't quite prove it yet. The stranger lifted his cup again, slow, deliberate. His hand was steady, not a tremor to be seen. Clara noticed. A man who's been in fights, real ones, has hands that know when to shake. His didn't. They were too still. You been a soldier? She asked softly once the laughter died down. He gave the faintest shake of his head. Used to be something. Don't rightly matter now. She studied him a moment longer. You got the look of a man who's buried too much to talk about it. He didn't answer, just kept sipping, eyes lost somewhere far beyond the walls of the saloon. Outside, the wind howled through the street, pushing dust under the door. The lamplight flickered. Rafe Dolan's gang went back to their cards, but their laughter was thinner now. They'd thrown their stones into a well, and they didn't much like how deep it sounded. Hours passed. The stranger stayed where he was, quiet as the grave. Some of the patrons left, some pretended not to stare. Clara cleaned the bar around him, careful not to ask more than he'd give. At one point she said, You ain't the first man to ride into Red Hollow looking to disappear, but you might be the first who looks like he already has. He gave her a small nod, eyes soft for the first time. Sometimes disappearing's the only peace a man can afford. When midnight came, the gang was drunk again, loud, rowdy, half-standing. Rafe shouted for another round, his voice booming over the piano. He looked back toward the bar. Hey, Ox, he slurred. You still breathing over there? Or you sleep with your eyes open like them buffalo skulls? The stranger didn't answer. Rafe laughed. Maybe he's waiting for Sunday. Herd giants only move when thunder calls their name. The laughter roared again, this time uglier. A bottle shattered somewhere. That's when the stranger finally looked up. Slowly, his eyes rose, gray as gunmetal, calm as still water. The room went quiet, one man at a time. He set his cup down and said evenly, Some storms don't start till fools whistle for him. No one laughed this time. The piano man's hand froze above the keys. Clara stopped wiping the bar. Even Rafe's grin faded a little, though he tried to hide it. Outside, thunder rolled over the desert plains, distant, but coming closer. The next morning broke slow and gold, spilling over the dry ridges, like a secret the sun didn't want to tell. Red Hollow was stirring to life. A hammer clinked at the blacksmith's. The telegraph wire sang faintly in the wind, and somewhere a rooster crowed too late to be useful. The stranger from the night before, the one they'd started calling the Gentle Ox, was already walking down the main road. His long shadow stretched ahead of him, as if it wanted to reach somewhere before he did. At the edge of town, beside the livery stable, a wagon leaned sideways, one wheel cracked clean through. A woman stood beside it, sleeves rolled to her elbows, face streaked with dust and sweat. A little boy crouched nearby, trying to help with a stick that did nothing but stir more dust. You'll hurt yourself doing that, the stranger said, his voice low but kind. The woman turned, startled, then studied him. A giant of a man with eyes that looked like they'd seen too many winters. Ain't got much choice, she replied. My husband's gone, and this will ain't gonna fix itself. He squatted beside the wagon, examining the splintered spokes. His hands, scarred and steady, ran along the rim like he was reading something only he could understand. Got a hammer. In the crate, she said. He worked quiet. The sound of his movements, wood creaking, metal clinking, breath steady, filled the space between them. The boy watched wide-eyed. When the man finally set the wheel straight, he gave it a slow turn. It spun clean. There, the stranger murmured. She'll hold another 100 miles easy. The boy smiled, his front teeth missing. What's your name, mister? The man hesitated, as though the answer might pull something up he'd buried deep. Then softly, Elias Boon. The woman froze, the name pulling something from memory. She'd heard it before, whispered once over poker tables, spoken by bounty men and soldiers who passed through. But she said nothing. He tipped his hat and started to walk away. At the saloon, Clara Briggs stood by the window, wiping down glasses, when she saw him helping the widow. When the boy's laughter carried faintly up the street, she stopped mid-polish, her eyes narrowing. Boon. The name fit too neatly in a place she tried to forget. Years ago, when the railroad men still came through, a bounty poster had floated through town. Faded paper, creased and torn. On it, wanted, Elias Boon, dead or alive. She remembered the rumor. A marksman so good he could shoot a fly off a mule's ear at 50 paces. A Union War hero turned outlaw. A man who disappeared after the massacre at Wind Creek, where soldiers fired on a Sioux village by mistake, killing every man, woman, and child. The official story called it a tragedy. The campfire stories called it a curse. They said Boone walked away from the army that day, dropped his rifle in the bloodied snow, and swore an oath never to draw iron again. The past, though, has a way of finding men like him. By noon, the peace in Red Hollow had started cracking. Rafe Dolan and his gang were riding again, dust pluming behind them like smoke. They tore through the streets, shooting at bottles, shouting insults, laughing loud enough to drown the wind. No one stopped them. Sheriff Tully, 2 bottles deep already, sat on his porch pretending not to hear. Clara watched from her doorway as Rafe's men tied up their horses outside her saloon. She braced herself. Inside, Rafe slammed a coin down on the bar. Whiskey. Leave the bottle. Clara poured without a word. He leaned in close, smiling his silver grin. You know, Clara, business been good lately. You keep it that way. Maybe I let it stay that way. I pay my dues same as everyone, she said. Not to me, you don't. He took a slow sip, his eyes crawling over the room. Think of it as protection. From accidents. You mean from you? She said flatly. Rafe's grin didn't fade. Now that's just ugly talk. Behind him, his men laughed and clapped shoulders. The air grew thick, not just with cigar smoke, but fear. Out in the street, Elias stood near the general store, watching it unfold. He could see through the open doors, Clara's stiff posture, Rafe's smug grin, the way the townsfolk outside averted their eyes. He didn't move, though his jaw tightened. A man beside him spat into the dust. You new here? Elias nodded once. Then you best learn quick. Dolan runs this town. Sheriff's his dog. The rest of us just try to keep out of the teeth. Elias's eyes stayed on the saloon. And nobody bites back. The man laughed bitterly. You see anyone still with teeth? That night, the sky burned red before going black. Elias sat on the edge of town by the livery, sharpening a knife that didn't look like it wanted to be sharpened. The widow and her boy came by again with a basket of bread. Made too much, she said. Thought maybe you'd want some. He accepted it with a nod. You didn't have to. You fixed my wagon. That's payment. Her boy looked up. Ma says you're a soldier. Elias paused. Used to be. Did you win? The boy asked. His answer came after a long silence. No one wins where I've been. The widow touched his arm lightly. You got kind eyes for a man who talks like that. Kind eyes don't change what they've seen, he said. His gaze drifted toward the mountains, dark against the stars. Guns only bring more ghosts. I laid mine down for good reason. The boy nodded like he understood, though he couldn't have. They left him sitting in the half-light, the night full of cricket songs and unspoken things. Over the next week, Red Hollow grew meaner. Rafe's gang began taking cattle from the ranchers up north. They beat an old man for refusing to sell his land, then dragged another through the street, just to make a point. Nobody dared cross them. Elias stayed quiet. He worked odd jobs, mending fences, carrying feed, always watching, never acting. Some said he was too scared. Others said too smart. Clara knew better. She'd seen the stillness of his hands, The kind that only comes from men who fired enough shots to know when not to. One evening, a storm rolled in from the hills, thunder grumbling low like something alive. The saloon filled early, folks trying to forget the sound. Elias sat in his usual spot, alone at the corner table, hat brim low. The door burst open, rain sweeping in with Rafe Dolan's men. They were drunk and mean, soaked in whiskey and thunderlight. Rafe himself was laughing loud enough to make the windows shake. They dragged in a rancher by the collar, old Pete Calloway, half drunk, half broken. "Look here, boys," Rafe shouted, the mighty rancher who don't want to pay his dues. Pete tried to speak, but Rafe shoved him into a chair, spilling his drink. "Ain't he a picture of pride?" Laughter rolled through the room, like rotten thunder. Clara stepped forward. "That's enough, Rafe." He turned, eyes flashing. "Careful, Clara. Wouldn't want folks thinking you favor the wrong side." Elias watched from his table. His hand hovered near his cup, not for the gun that wasn't there, but like a reflex, an old memory of motion. His fingers twitched once, then stilled. Rafe leaned close to the old rancher. "Tell me, Pete, you got any last words before I take your pride?" Pete spat at his boots. The laughter turned sharp. Rafe raised his hand, and that's when Clara's voice cracked through the noise. "You call yourself a man, Dolan?" The saloon fell silent. The sun climbed high over Red Hollow, glaring white through the thin clouds, burning the dust into the color of bone. Even the wind had given up moving. Heat shimmered off the rooftops, and the air itself felt thick, like it was holding its breath. The town lay quiet, too quiet, as if the earth knew what kind of day this was going to be. At the edge of town, faded first, came the sound of hooves. Slow, steady, then faster, a rhythm that grew into thunder. Dogs began barking, doors slammed, and mothers pulled children off the streets. By the time Rafe Dolan and his gang came into view, Red Hollow was already shutting itself away. 6 riders, dust rising behind them like smoke from a fire that had been waiting all morning to start. They rode with their guns loose in their hands, laughter echoing down Main Street. Rafe was at the head, silver tooth flashing every time the sun caught his grin. He fired once into the air, the crack of it bouncing off the canyon walls. "Wake up, Red Hollow," he shouted. "The law's here, our kind of law." His men hooted, firing at signs, shattering glass, driving a stray dog into an alley. One bullet tore through the sheriff's hanging badge outside the jailhouse, sending it spinning into the dust. The sheriff himself stumbled out onto the boardwalk, red-faced and trembling, whiskey bottle still in his hand. Now, hold on, boys." Rafe shot the bottle clean from his fingers, shards glinting like glass rain. "Best thing you ever done, Sheriff," Rafe said, laughing. "You just resigned." The sheriff ducked inside and didn't come back out. Elias Boon sat at the far end of the saloon, same place he always did, back to the wall, coffee untouched, hat pulled low. The piano man had stopped playing an hour ago, too nervous to touch the keys. Even the flies had gone still. When the gang's boots hit the boardwalk, Clara Briggs looked up from behind the bar. Her eyes found Elias. He didn't move, didn't blink. The doors slammed open. Rafe Dolan swaggered in first, sweat shining on his neck, pistol swinging from his finger. His men fanned out behind him like shadows. Well, Rafe drawled. "If it ain't the ghost town that forgot how to smile." He tipped his hat toward Clara. "Afternoon, sweetheart. You still pouring for free, or you charging heroes now?" Clara's voice was steady, but her jaw was tight. "You want whiskey, you pay for it." Rafe grinned, pulling a coin from his vest. He dropped it in her tip jar, silver, marked with blood rust. "There, paid in full." Then he turned. His eyes landed on Elias. "Look who's still sitting," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "The gentle ox. Thought maybe you'd grown roots in that chair." Elias didn't respond. His fingers traced the edge of the cup, slow, deliberate. Rafe walked closer, heavy steps echoing in the hollow room. "Ain't you tired of sitting, giant?" he sneered. "Maybe you need to be put down." His men laughed, too loud, too forced. One of them, a wiry kid with a bandana around his neck, mimed a slow draw, pretending to aim at Elias. Bang, he said, grinning. Just like that. Elias lifted his eyes then, pale gray beneath the shadow of his hat. The room seemed to shrink around that look. Careful, he said quietly. You don't know the sound of your own death yet. Rafe's smile twitched. Big words for a man hiding behind a cup. He stepped closer. The air between them turned to glass. Then he reached out and slapped Clara across the face. Hard. The sound cracked through the saloon like a whip. She staggered back, blood on her lip, one hand gripping the counter to stay upright. No one spoke. No one breathed. Rafe leaned over her, voice low. Don't you ever tell me what I pay for. You understand? Elias's cup cracked at his hand. The handle broke clean off, the sound soft but sharp enough to make Rafe glance back. Something you want to say, Ox? Rafe asked, his grin returning. Or are you still playing statue? Elias's voice came slow, like gravel turning over. You drew first blood, Dolan. The laughter from Rafe's men came uneasy this time. Oh, he talks now. One of them said, forcing a chuckle. Another outlaw, broad shoulders, scar across his cheek, took a step forward. We'll see how long he talks once we break that jaw. His hand went for his gun. What happened next came faster than thunder. Elias moved, a single, fluid motion, the kind that only comes from muscle memory burned into bone. His hand went to his hip, the revolver clearing leather before anyone realized he'd drawn. 6 shots. Not wild, not rushed, but measured, cold, perfect. Each one found its mark. One hit the gunman square in the chest. Another dropped the man beside him mid-laugh. A third took the bottle from Rafe's hand, shattering it before the whiskey reached the floor. The fourth sent a man spinning into the piano, keys exploding into noise. The fifth went through the wrist of the outlaw reaching for his knife. The sixth stopped an inch from Rafe Dolan's scalp, clean through the crown of his hat. The echo of it rolled through the saloon, like rolling thunder over open plains. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then came the sound of the empty casings hitting the floor, one after another, small metallic chimes, cruelly delicate. Smoke hung in the air, thin ribbons twisting upward into the sunlight, slanting through the cracked window. Elias stood perfectly still, his revolver still smoking. His eyes didn't hold rage, only sorrow, deep, old, endless sorrow. Rafe's hand trembled as he reached up, pulling his hat off. He stared through the hole, disbelief painted across his face. You, he whispered. You didn't even look. Elias lowered the gun, the steel catching the light. Didn't have to. Outside, the wind picked up at last, pushing through the doors and scattering dust across the floor. One of Rafe's wounded men groaned, clutching his leg. No one helped him. Rafe stumbled backward, eyes darting between the bodies, the smoke, and the quiet giant standing calm in the middle of it all. You swore off killing, he said, voice cracking. You took an oath. Elias looked at him, not like a man looking at an enemy, but at something already gone. I swore to never draw first, he said softly. Didn't. Rafe's breath hitched. He backed toward the door. You'll hang for this. Sheriff'll. The sheriff left his badge in the dust. Elias cut in. You hung this town long before I got here. Rafe froze halfway to the exit. You think you saved them? Elias holstered his gun, slow and sure. I didn't come here to save anyone. Clara wiped the blood from her mouth, staring at him like she was seeing him for the first time. Then why'd you stay? She asked quietly. He looked at her, eyes gray as a storm about to break. Because peace don't mean running forever. Rafe lunged then, desperate, shaking, grabbing for the fallen gun at his feet. Elias didn't blink. One motion, one shot. Rafe's hand exploded red across the floorboards. The pistol clattered away, spinning to a stop near the door. Rafe fell to his knees, clutching the ruin of his hand, gasping. You shot my hand. Elias nodded once. You won't hurt another soul with it. He turned away, walking toward the door. Outside, the townsfolk had gathered, drawn by the noise. When the door creaked open, they saw him, tall, calm, stepping into the sunlight like a ghost returning to daylight. The dawn came slow to red hollow, bleeding from the hills in long, soft streaks of gold. Smoke still drifted from the saloon door, the scent of gunpowder, clinging to the street like the memory of thunder. The bodies had been moved, but not far, laid in the dust, covered with rough blankets that couldn't hide what had been done. The town stood silent, every door cracked open, every eye fixed on the man who'd brought the storm. Elias Boon sat alone on the edge of the boardwalk, elbows resting on his knees, head bowed. His hat lay beside him, coated in a thin layer of ash. He wasn't praying. Men like him didn't anymore, but something about the stillness felt like the start of a prayer that never found its end. When the sheriff finally rode in, the horse's hooves stirred up a dry wind that carried the smell of death. Sheriff Tully looked worse than the morning whiskey that had claimed most of his courage. His face was pale beneath the grime, his badge hanging crooked on his vest. He dismounted slow, eyeing the scene, trying to piece together what was left of his town. "Lord above," he muttered, staring at the blood-dark stains in the dust. "What happened here?" A dozen voices rose at once. The townsfolk had found their tongues again, each one eager to speak truth before the sheriff could twist it. "They drew first, Sheriff," called the blacksmith, wiping soot from his hands. Elias warned him. They wouldn't listen. "They were robbing the town blind," another shouted. Rafe Dolan slapped Miss Clara clean across the face before he even reached for his gun. Tully looked from one speaker to the next, blinking like a man caught between duty and the whiskey haze. His gaze finally landed on Elias, who still hadn't moved. "That true?" the sheriff asked, voice low. Elias lifted his head. His eyes were gray, calm, stripped of anything human but sorrow. "It's true enough," he said. "They drew first. I finished it." The sheriff sighed, his shoulders sagging. "You know what this means, Boone. Word'll travel. Folks talk faster than the wind. You won't get peace after this." Elias stood, tall enough to blot the sun from the sheriff's face. "I never came looking for peace," he said. "Just a place quiet enough to remember what it sounded like." Tully looked around at the townsfolk, the faces of people who, for the first time in years, stood upright without fear. He spat in the dust and nodded once. "Then I didn't see nothing," he muttered, turning away. The people watched him ride out, but Elias stayed where he was, staring down the empty street. The saloon doors creaked open behind him. Clara stepped out, her cheeks swollen and bruised, her apron streaked with blood and dust. She walked up beside him, arms folded tight against the morning chill. "You saved this town," she said softly. He didn't look at her. "No, ma'am," he said. "I just ended what should have never begun." Her eyes glistened, not from tears. Clara Briggs didn't cry in front of anyone, but from the kind of ache that comes when someone carries too much silence. "You'll leave, won't you?" she said. He nodded. "Ain't no staying for men like me. Wherever I go, the ghosts find a road." She reached out, hesitating before resting a hand against his arm. "If the world had more men like you, maybe we wouldn't need guns." Elias turned to her then, the faintest smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "If the world had more women like you, maybe we wouldn't make M." The two of them stood there for a long moment, the kind of stillness that feels like the closing of a book. The wind picked up, brushing through the street, rattling the church bell rope. When he finally walked back into the saloon, it was empty. Chairs overturned, broken glass glittering on the floor. He crossed to the bar, set a few silver coins down beside his untouched cup of coffee, and said to no one in particular, "For what's owed?" Then he walked out again. By the time the first real light struck the windows, Elias Boon was saddling his horse. The animal stamped once, snorted, as if sensing the miles waiting ahead. He tightened the cinch, brushed the dust from its mane, and slipped his rifle back into the worn leather scabbard. Behind him, footsteps approached. He didn't turn. "Mr. Boone," a small voice called. It was the widow's boy, the one he'd helped by the wagon days ago. The boy's boots slapped the dirt as he ran up, breathless, eyes wide with something between awe and sorrow. "You can't leave," he said. "You're a hero now. Ma says so." Elias paused, his hand resting on the saddle horn. "That's so." The boy nodded hard. "You stopped the bad men. You saved everybody." Elias looked down at him for a long moment, then shook his head slowly. "Heroes don't bury this many men, son." The boy frowned, confusion clouding his small face. "But you didn't do nothing wrong." Elias gave a tired smile. "Don't much matter. Wrong's got a long shadow. Even if you outrun it, it follows." He swung up into the saddle, movement smooth, practiced, like the horse, and he were one body. The boy's voice trembled. "Will you come back someday?" Elias tipped his hat. "If the wind don't forget me." He nudged the horse forward. The animal started slow, hooves crunching the dry ground, the sound hollow in the morning quiet. The town watched from windows, from porches, from behind their cups of coffee that had long gone cold. No one spoke. They just watched the man who'd come from nowhere, saved them, and was already fading back into it. At the edge of town, where the dirt road met the endless horizon, Elias stopped and looked back one last time. The sun was rising behind the saloon, throwing his shadow long across the dust. Clara stood in the doorway, apron fluttering in the breeze. She raised a hand, a faint silhouette against the light. He touched the brim of his hat in silent farewell. Then he rode on. The dust rose behind him in a slow golden trail, curling like smoke that never reached the sky. His figure grew smaller, swallowed by the land, first by distance, then by the glare of the sun, until he was gone entirely, leaving nothing but the wind and the echo of hooves that lingered too long. Inside the saloon, Clara walked back to the far end where he used to sit. The chair was still there, pushed slightly off-center, one leg cracked. A faint scorch mark on the floor where his spilled coffee had met the lantern light the night before. She rested her hand on the back of it. The room was quiet now, the kind of quiet that didn't feel empty, but sacred. Someone outside asked softly, "You think he'll be back?" Clara didn't answer. She looked at the chair, the light spilling across it from the open door, and finally said, "Men like him don't come back. The West remembers him, so it don't have to see him again." The piano player, shaking the dust from his sleeves, sat down at his bench and struck a single note. It rang pure and lonely through the room. Outside, the wind caught a piece of paper tumbling along the street, a torn, faded Bounty poster. The name printed on it was half gone, but one word remained clear: Boon. The poster drifted past the church steps, over the graves by the hill, and vanished into the open desert. By noon, life began to move again. The blacksmith's hammer rang, the children's laughter returned to the street, and the saloon door swung as men came and went, speaking softer than before. Yet every now and then, someone's eyes would drift toward that corner chair, half-shadowed and waiting, and the air would grow still for a moment, like a man tipping his hat to a ghost he couldn't see.